Tuesday marks 6 months since President Biden's inauguration. The president marked the occasion by meeting with his cabinet members. He touted his administration's response to the pandemic, noting deaths from COVID are down 90% compared to 6 months ago. CDC data also show more than half of Americans have received at least one dose of the vaccine. But the Delta variant is driving a spike in new infections, and the fate of Mr. Biden's economic policies remains unclear in the narrowly divided Senate. The president, meantime, also acknowledged his administration has some work to do on other issues.
There's much more to be done and so much more to do. Tackling voting rights, which is an existential threat to democracy right now. The things that are being asked are just beyond the pale. And the vice president has been working hard on this issue and going to continue to. We all are, but there's much more to do. We have to tackle the immigration problem, which we're working really hard to get done in a humane and serious way. Police reform and crime.
For more, let's bring in Leslie Sanchez and Antjuan Seawright. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist, and Antjuan is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Welcome. It's really great to talk to you both. Antjuan, we've got a lot to get through. Let me just start off by asking, what is your assessment? How do you think the president has handled the challenges of governing at this time?
A+. When this president took office, we were living through one of the worst pandemics in most of our lifetimes that had caused some of the worst economic challenges in most of our lifetime. But this president walked into office on day one with a focus on the focus, prioritizing the priorities, and controlling the controllables. As a result of those three things, Elaine, the American people, Democrats and Republicans, have given him very handsome remarks. I have not seen a survey that has not given this president above 50% approval rating. It's been historic in its own way. The reason for that is because, one, he put together the most diverse cabinet in our nation's history. He passed the American Rescue Act, I sometimes refer to as the American Survival Act, because it was literally survival for so many people. A record number of judges, including a historic number of African-American women, to the U.S. Appeals Court, and so many other things this president has done, including historic numbers in terms of job creation in the first 5 months of a presidency. That is a result of Joe Biden executing the plays he drew up in the midterms, and that's why the public has rewarded him so handsomely with their approval rating of him. But also, he came in, Elaine, and adjusted the temperature. A very different comparison to the previous presidents, or even previous presidents, when you think about the short and long term and what that actually means.
Leslie, from the Republican perspective, how would you rate the president's performance so far?
I'd say, Elaine, that anybody who didn't like Trump, even being Republicans, they still don't like Trump. They were, definitely having a sigh of relief. And nothing has changed with respect to that in comparison to how the hyperbole and the constant tweets and how that affected not only governance but perceptions of the Republican Party. And there are many within the Republicans who are glad to distance themselves from that. They were glad, many Republicans, to get rid of the travel ban on certain countries that Biden immediately unrolled. Many were glad, you could argue, to end zero tolerance, which increased a lot of family separation on the border. But that's about where Republicans are going to stop in terms of favoring and patting this president on the back. If you look at the most recent, I would say, Reuters poll, only about 17% of Republicans support what the president is doing right now. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I would say the president came in talking among his 100 promises, his big promises, was to look at a bipartisan approach, particularly on the economy, with Republicans. And you've seen the opposite of that. People could say it's a super polarized environment, it's a difficult thing. But if you even think about the fact that with the American Rescue Plan that Antjuan poignantly brought about, many felt that Republicans felt it was too big. It was hitting at the wrong time. And even this $300 per child tax credit that's hitting many households right now, a lot of people feel that it's going right back out to pay for the higher prices. They're seeing an uptick in inflation. There's concerns and growing concerns from, I would say, all voters about the economy. So that pall of the economy and where it's going and this recovery will continue to haunt this president throughout this administration until we get way past this pandemic and really start to see the effect of many of his big spending policies.
I want to ask you more about the economy in just a moment, but Antjuan, there are efforts underway in several Republican-led states to impose new restrictions on voting. The president has urged Congress to pass laws to protect voter rights, but some voting rights advocates say that he is not doing enough. What's your take on that?
Well, I think the president is doing what he can. However, I think the president can do a little more. And I know he's doing a lot of work behind the scenes, and I know he's giving the Congress the ability to do what they have been elected to do. However, the constituency that gave this presidency the nod in the presidential preference primary, and I believe the constituency that took him across the finish line first in the general election, were people who look like me. And in any given election, Elaine, black people are casting a survival vote. And when you think about how high the stakes are in 2022, when you think about the pieces of legislation, some have been filed and passed all across the country, and you think about who is impacted the most, it's the same constituency that gave this presidency the presidency. And so this president has to create this fierce urgency of now, borrowing words from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. about this issue of voting rights, because it is by far the most consequential issue of our day. And if nothing is done at the federal level, all the things that have been done at the state level all across the country will be impacted or will be implemented in the midterms, and that could cause major harm, I think, to the long and short-term agenda of this presidency.
Leslie, let me ask you about bipartisanship for just a moment. The president, of course, has spoken quite frequently about bringing bipartisan back to Washington. He campaigned on that. Do you think he's made good on that pledge so far?
Not yet, Elaine. And there's, you say, a lot of hand-wringing on both sides. Political operatives will say that's really not going to be something that brings us the big win, because Democrats have been pulling progressively to the left. You're hearing a lot of talk about this $3.5 trillion spending plan they want to have. That's, you know, big government, which is certainly not something Republicans are going to get in line with. And they're talking about moving something so massive that fundamentally changes and, you know, inserts government in so many levels of life without Republican support. That's really going to be the tumble that you hear about through this Congress. It's those kind of really big fights on budget, on numbers, on who's going to pay for it, not to mention some of these other issues like border security, immigration. There's been a lot of missteps on that. There are missteps on handling this issue with Cuba right now, and the delayed response and the poor response. So that was an easy win where Republicans and Democrats could have come together. So in terms of bipartisanship, it's lacking right now. Republicans aren't seeing anything that makes them want to come to the table. And that's really a part of leadership, part of the president coming forward with something, and some of those kind of leaders on the Hill who can take this back to Republicans and look for a way to compromise. But right now, we're not seeing that.
You know, Leslie, also I want to ask you about the economy and specifically, you know, inflation. We have seen consumer prices going up. How much of a vulnerability do you think that is going to be for the Biden administration and Democrats moving forward?
Elaine, that's the nail on the head, right? That's the area that both Republicans and Democrats are watching. I was just listening to some focus groups this week, and that is really the topic people are saying, that they may have money coming in, they may have gotten some sort of government money, but the second they go to the gas station, the second they buy milk, the second they're just trying to buy their basic goods and services, the prices are so high. And they see that as a direct reflection on a poor management in Congress, and the president is going to get the splash of that. They're not seeing this economy working for them. While you may see an uptick in jobs, an uptick in growth in the businesses, people are going to point back to the Keystone Pipeline and, you know, eliminating all those jobs in 14 plus states that really wanted to see that revenue in their states. So inflation is going to have that kind of ripple effect at the purse strings on a very personal level for these families. And it's an area that both sides of the aisle really have to be paying attention to.
Elaine,
Antjuan, we did hear the president mention other issues today. Yeah, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, but I also am curious to get your thoughts, Antjuan, on immigration, because Leslie brought that up. You know, what are some of the challenges facing the Biden administration when it comes to immigration and police reform? And also, I know you probably have some thoughts on what Leslie just said as well.
Well, I do. On these issues that the president knows he will have to address because Republicans will try to use this as a political weapon of mass destruction and distraction in the midterms, he knows that he's going to have to step up to the plate and do what he can control. I think this president has done a good job of at least extending the right hand of fellowship to attempt to include Republicans in some of these conversations that he's having on some of these issues. Most of these issues this administration have taken on head on are those that over 50% of the American people want to deal with in a bipartisan way. I think that's why this president has caught hell, even from those in his own party, about wanting to work with Republicans. I think he's been so good at trying to bring Republicans into the mix, and when they've had success, truth be told, you've had Republicans who voted no and took the dough, and now they're trying to take credit for things like the rescue plan and other things that they have benefited from, like the child tax credit, by the way, which will cut child poverty in half in this country. And so while Republicans, I think, have a political game or political job of trying to push back on everything this president wants to do, at the end of the day, the results have been very clear, and the proof has been in the pudding. When it comes to issues like criminal justice reform, immigration, and so forth, look, no one said that he's done. What we said is he's made tremendous progress. And by the time we get to the 2022 midterms, the American people will have their chance to grade this president and his party at the ballot box. What I am cautiously optimistic about is that he will do most of the things he committed to do on the campaign trail, and I think he will continue to get higher marks as a result.
All right, Leslie Sanchez and Antjuan Seawright. I really miss both of you guys very much. Thank you.
We miss you,
We miss you too.